The Power of Silence, Carl Jung, and the Psychology of Solitude. Have you ever wondered why being alone doesn't bring you suffering, but instead profound peace? While for so many others, solitude is synonymous with painful emptiness, have you ever felt, perhaps, that there was something inherently wrong with you for not wanting to be at every party, every gathering, or constantly surrounded by a crowd? From an early age, we are relentlessly taught that a person's worth resides in their ability to perform, to be charismatic, incessantly talkative, and intensely sociable. But what if I told you that this is simply an imposed narrative, and that in fact, your deep desire for silence and solitude may be one of the clearest signs of psychological maturity? We are drowning in a culture shaped by non-stop performance, hyperconnection, and the constant demanding need to be visible. Social media feeds, endless mandatory meetings, the aggressive glorification of networking, everything is constantly pulling us outward, away from ourselves. Being genuinely introspective has been rebranded as being antisocial. Enjoying your own company has been twisted into a sign of weakness, eccentricity, or worse, some kind of emotional illness that must be fixed. And this is where Carl Gustav Jung comes into the conversation, one of the few revolutionary thinkers who had the courage to assert the absolute opposite. Jung observed with surgical precision that Western society has developed a profound, damaging prejudice against introversion. He realized that many people are not fleeing the world when they isolate themselves. They are simply returning home, inward. According to him, there is a crucial, life-altering difference between loneliness and solitude, and most people don't even know that this distinction exists. Loneliness is the painful emptiness. Solitude is the healing silence. Perhaps you are here because you feel that precise calling, because you have already noticed that the more you force yourself to fit into noisy, draining environments, the more distant you feel from your true self. What no one told you is that this preference of yours is not a flaw. It is a sign that your psyche is ripening, that you are developing what Jung called psychological self-sufficiency, the rare internal ability to generate meaning from within, without relying on the constant, exhausting stimulation of the external world. This video is a direct conversation with you, the one who feels that the noisy world has suffocated your essence, the one who has been labeled as strange or disconnected, when, in truth, you are simply trying to stay whole. Are you ready to see silence with new eyes? Loneliness is a hole. Solitude is a portal. The pervasive idea that those who prefer to be alone are suffering is one of the great misunderstandings of our time. The myth suggests that silence is empty, that isolation is a problem to be immediately fixed. For generations, we have tragically confused solitude with loneliness, and this confusion has caused a silent, continuous damage to the psyche of millions. Carl Jung was among the first to shatter this illusion. He understood that being alone does not mean being lost. Quite the opposite. For Jung, solitude is a state of conscious choice, an internal, deliberate decision to step away from the noise of the collective in order to hear something far more important: yourself. Loneliness is a deep hole created by the absence of connection. Solitude is a vast space created for the deepest reconnection that exists, with your own self. People who consciously cultivate solitude are not hiding. They are finding themselves. They do not avoid life. They savor it at a different, quieter frequency. In a culture that relentlessly glorifies constant exposure and performance, solitude is an act of resistance, a spiritual protest. It requires immense courage, because being alone in silence means facing the one thing most people flee from: their own thoughts, their unhealed traumas, their repressed desires, and their inconvenient truths. Yet society harshly judges those who withdraw, as if human value were directly linked to the sheer volume of social interactions one maintains, as if silence were a failure, not a form of wisdom. This distorted view causes many introverts to grow up feeling fundamentally defective, struggling against their own nature, trying to mold themselves into a personality that does not belong to them. But Jung knew something few have the audacity to say: it is in silence that you heal. It is when you are alone that you finally hear your intuition, observe your patterns, understand your pain, and access what he called the unconscious. Solitude is the incubator of self-knowledge. And here is one of the most counterintuitive discoveries. The more time a person spends in true solitude, not forced isolation, the more they develop a powerful presence, an unwavering clarity in their words, and a peace that does not depend on anyone else's approval. They become dangerous to the system because they no longer need to be convinced of anything. They do not need to fill internal voids with external distractions. They are enough. Perhaps you have felt this quiet internal shift. Perhaps you are on this path now, sensing that the more you silence the external world, the more the internal world begins to expand and organize itself. And this is only the beginning. The introvert's energy, the cost of the performance mask. The introvert's mind does not function like others, and this is not a deficit. It is a radically different psychic configuration. Carl Jung recognized that some people are simply not built for excessive stimulation, for the incessant hustle, for the superficial clamor of everyday interactions. They were made to dive deep, to contemplate, to explore the silent depths of the human psyche as one navigates an invisible ocean. This type of mind operates at a slower, denser rhythm. Jung called this energy orientation introversion. Contrary to popular belief, he did not view it as withdrawal or insecurity. He viewed it as a specific, powerful type of emotional intelligence, an intelligence that operates from the inside out. The introvert absorbs the world intensively. They do not just hear, they listen to the subtext. They do not just see, they perceive what lies behind what is shown. In a single conversation, they pick up on micro-expressions, hesitations, contradictions, and subtle emotional tones that most people do not even register. This is exhausting. This weighs heavily. This requires substantial time for processing. Therefore, solitude is not a luxury for the introvert. It is a biological and spiritual necessity. Being alone is the moment they reconnect with their center, recharge their energy, and most importantly, where they can finally hear their own voice, the one that gets brutally lost in the daily clamor. While the extrovert recharges in the presence of others, the introvert only rebalances in their absence. And here is a central painful point. Modern culture, dominated by ideals of productivity, exposure, and constant sociability, was not made for this type of mind. From childhood, the introvert is constantly pushed out of themselves. When they prefer to read instead of playing with peers, they are called strange. When they remain silent in a group, they are seen as arrogant or apathetic. When they need withdrawal, they are accused of coldness. All of this contributes to a deep, debilitating internal disconnection, a constant gnawing feeling of inadequacy. The world convinces them that there is something fundamentally wrong with being who they are, and thus, the performance cycle is born. The introvert starts to act. They learn to smile when they don't want to talk when they would rather be silent, to expose themselves when everything inside them screams for retreat. But each of these small betrayals comes at a profound cost. Jung identified this as chronic psychic exhaustion, a weariness that is not immediately visible, but gradually erodes the soul, a fatigue that does not stem from the body, but from the continuous energy-sapping effort of playing a role that suffocates who you truly are. Perhaps you know this exhaustion intimately, the crushing weight of forced interactions, of environments that demand far more than you can possibly give, of conversations that seem to drain your very vital energy. This exhaustion is the clearest sign that your psychic energy is being aggressively directed outward when, in fact, it should be protected and cultivated internally. The ultimate danger is the mask, the social persona, that the introvert wears for too long. Who wears the mask of forced extroversion day after day until they forget who they were beneath it? The further you walk away from your essence to meet deafening external expectations, the more fragile and artificial your identity becomes. This internal division manifests physically: constant fatigue, insomnia, social anxiety, a crushing sense of emptiness even when surrounded by people. This is the psychic collapse of someone who spends too much time living a life that does not truly represent who they are. Society applauds this performance, but the introvert who feels compelled to live as an extrovert without ever having the space to return to their center becomes ill, not because they are weak, but because they have been trained to violently ignore their own fundamental energetic needs. Psychological self-sufficiency, the master of self. Carl Jung never considered the introvert to be socially inept. In fact, he observed something that runs completely counter to what you have been led to believe. Many people who prefer solitude are not avoiding social interaction because they are weak. They avoid it because they see clearly the inauthentic theater it has become, and more critically, because they have developed a skill that few possess: psychological self-sufficiency. But what does this mean, fundamentally? Psychological self-sufficiency is the rare, high-level ability to generate satisfaction, clarity, and meaning without relying on constant external validation or stimulation. It is the capacity to be emotionally self-sustaining, to find fulfillment not in others, but profoundly within oneself. It means you do not need to fill internal voids with noise, presence, or approval, because you have already learned how to engage with your inner world. This is not an initial stage of the psyche. It is a high level of psychological maturity. Such people are not antisocial. They are intensely selective. They recognize that most everyday interactions are superficial, governed by social conventions, masks, and artificial courtesies. They understand that there is more genuine truth in a moment of deep introspection than in dozens of empty exchanges of words. For this reason, they make a conscious choice. They prefer quality over quantity, meaningful relationships over popularity, and soul-deep dialogues over automatic defensive exchanges. Jung called this ability differentiation, the capacity to be comfortable both profoundly alone and effortlessly in company, and to choose between one or the other, not out of obligation or social pressure, but out of inner necessity. Those who develop this differentiation can move through the world with immense ease. They can interact, communicate, and even shine in social contexts. But they never lose sight of their own axis. Interaction becomes a conscious gesture, not a crippling dependency. Here is the key point. These people are not bad at dealing with others. In fact, many of them possess social intelligence superior to that of the forced extrovert. But they do not waste energy on superficiality. They observe, feel, and listen before speaking. And when they do speak, there is presence, substance, and depth. They are those rare people who, even in silence, transform the atmosphere of a room. Not because they shout, but because their presence is authentic, centered, and whole. The world may be in ruins outside, but inside there is structure, there is peace, there is an unshakable center. The threat to the system, the sovereign individual. Psychologically self-sufficient people are a threat, not through violence, but simply because they do not need the system to feel complete. And this, within a culture aggressively shaped to generate dependence, is profoundly unacceptable. Carl Jung realized something that few dare to utter. Societies are built to keep the individual distracted, busy, and fragmented. Why? Because a centered, quiet, and whole individual is exceptionally difficult to manipulate. They do not buy impulsively out of a fabricated need. They do not vote based on fear or propaganda. They do not desperately seek validation from a screen. They are not shaped by collective expectation. They observe it from the outside with critical distance, and this poses a profound risk to any power structure. Look at how the modern world operates. At every moment, you are bombarded with constant stimuli. Advertisements, notifications, disposable entertainment, social comparisons, invitations to constant exposure. There is a massive structural effort to keep you perpetually turned outward so that you never have the necessary time to look inward. The goal is to prevent you from developing what Jung called differentiated individuality, the ability to become a singular, sovereign, whole human being. Because if you become that, you escape. You escape the control of the consumer industry, the mass media, and the compulsive search for approval. You become, in psychological terms, free. And a free being is a fundamental problem for any system that relies on obedience, illusion, or fear. That is why the world not only does not encourage solitude, but actively pathologizes it. Culture has turned the desire for conscious solitude into a clinical symptom, when often it is the exact opposite, a sign of deep health, internal alignment, and emotional maturity. The centered introvert, the one who cultivates solitude as a tool of strength, simply does not react to these pressures. They do not need to prove anything. They do not need to appear happy on social media. They do not need status, numbers, or an audience. They already possess the one thing the world cannot offer: internal contentment. Jung warned us that the true process of individuation, the awakening of the individual soul within the collective, is profoundly subversive. The more you know yourself, the less you are swayed. The more time you spend in conscious solitude, the more you realize the emptiness of social performance. Solitude is the portal to your true self. Being alone is not a punishment. It is a rare privilege in a world utterly addicted to distraction. But to truly see this, you need courage. The courage to break free from psychological dependence on the collective, to step away from the crushing noise and finally face what remains when all the masks fall. You. Carl Jung saw in solitude the ultimate opportunity for the individual to find themselves. Because the true self, your deepest, most authentic, unconditioned essence, cannot be heard amidst the clamor of expectations, comparison, and haste. It only emerges in the silence. And it is in this silence that the most transformative process a human being can experience begins: individuation. To individuate is to become who you truly are, not who others expect you to be. It is to excavate the layers of conditioning, fear, and false identity that have been imposed over the years. It is learning to sustain your own presence, even when it disturbs, even when it destabilizes others. Because an individual at peace with their own solitude radiates something that cannot be bought, taught, or simulated: inner sovereignty. Here is what few dare to admit. Most people cannot stand being alone because deep down, they cannot stand themselves. They fear what they might find when the world goes quiet. Fear of discovering that their lives have been shaped to please others, that their desires are projections of others. That is why they need the constant presence of others, not out of love, but out of escape. You who have made it this far may have felt this, that moment when, amidst the silence, something within you finally organizes itself. A clarity that arises effortlessly, a feeling of being exactly where you should be. No role to play, No expectations to fulfill, just presence, just you. This is the state of true solitude, a profound return home. Therefore, if you feel different, if you desperately need time alone, if the noise of the world utterly tires you, know that this is not weakness. It is sensitivity. It is strength. It is a sign that you are awakening to something that few have the courage to face. Keep going. Trust the call of silence. It is not pulling you away from life. It is leading you back to it, only now in a way that finally, truly makes sense to you.